So while we're getting that worked out, I'll go ahead and get started. I am an old professor, so I know how to accommodate some of these changes. It's all fine. First off, really excited to talk to everyone. I know this gets a large audience, and I think it's a really good opportunity for DARPA to try to integrate with more of the community because one of the big things that I want to leave you guys with today is the fact that we as an agency are looking for the best ideas out there. And oftentimes those best ideas come from unexpected places. And so it's not just the large military community that we seek to fund, but we're actually looking for innovative approaches to different problem sets for a variety of different people. So I'm excited to tell you a little bit about my role, how DARPA works. I know you had Wes Bennett a few weeks ago that talked to you all about how contracting at DARPA works and things like that, the business side. But I wanted to give you a little flavor as a program manager in the biological technology office, what we are looking for, and maybe give you some insight into how to communicate with us the most effectively. And so, to do that, I think one of the best ways maybe to jump into it is to tell you a little bit about my background. And that'll tell you how DARPA program managers end up becoming DARPA program managers. About 7 years ago, I was a quasi-administrator at a branch campus in the University of Texas system at the University of Texas at Tyler, where actually I'm still a professor. And I went to a meeting for VPs of research and AVPs and met the founding director of the biological technology office, Jeff Ling. And I had a conversation with Jeff Ling out in the hallway. And my background is in agricultural biosecurity. I'm an entomologist by training. And so I do quite a bit of work in plants and insects systems. And so I wanted to find out if DARPA had an appetite for, wanted to find out if DARPA had an appetite working in that space. And talking with Jeff, he said, yes, we do, but we don't have the right people to be working on that. Do you want to come to the agency and become a program manager? And so that started this journey of trying to figure out how that works. And what I was able to do was step away from the university for a short time. Starts with a 2-year contract. The DARPA model is we bring program managers in, get as much work out of them, have them execute on their vision, and then get rid of them before they become old and cranky. So, that idea that always bringing in new ideas and pushing in new directions and not having the person that says, well, that didn't work back in 1984, so it won't work now. So I've been very lucky. I've been extended a few times. I've gotten to stay at DARPA longer than a lot of folks, but it was great. When I was interviewing, I came with a couple of large program ideas. And with those ideas, I was kind of astounded to find out when I showed up on my first day, the director and deputy director of my office, Barry Pilata and Justin Sanchez, were both like, okay, which one of those are we doing first? And so I had half expected to come in managing sort of a portfolio that existed, but instead I came in to build a portfolio. So that's the first point that I want to really let you guys know about, is that DARPA is very much a program manager centric agency. So as a program manager, I came in and I had this concept of a program that became Insect Allies, where we were working with plant viruses, insects that transmit those viruses, and then the expression of certain genetic material to the benefit of the plant to make them insect resistant, pathogen resistant, drought tolerant, things like that. as a way to sort of take advantage of some of the genetic technology that was there that in the industry takes, 10 to 15 years to get into the field. We wanted to have a faster timeline. And so I came in with that as a vision. And I was looking, when I put the BAA, the broad agency announcement out, I was looking for researchers that would grab onto that dream and push it forward. And so the first thing, that I want to make sure that I get across today is that when you come to a DARPA program manager, don't bring your old grant proposal that wasn't accepted at USDA or NSF or NIH, things like that, but actually come in understanding the vision of the program manager so that you can align your capabilities to the program manager's vision within the program or within a larger portfolio that they have. I've actually just sunsetted 2 programs, but was running 5, plus a lot of small efforts. But the idea is, I want to execute on a large concept. And so what I'm looking for is researchers that fit into, that sort of concept of operations. And so, I ended up at DARPA and put out, stood up 4 programs, inherited another. And so each one of those was sort of building on ideas. At the same time, we also have access to certain pots of money that would allow us to look at higher risk efforts. And that's in this, we can fund what we call seedlings, and they support current research, but oftentimes they can also be smaller dollar number efforts if we would just want to see if there's a there. So, I'd love for Sandy to share the slides if that's possible. It might help guide the conversation. But what I do want to do, we're at 12 minutes in now, and I want to make sure that if people have questions, that will give time for that. So if you can share the slides, I can go through very quickly, sort of giving an overview of what a program manager portfolio looks like. All right, you can jump to the next slide. So this one, very quickly, just let you know that DARPA is an agency that was started in 1958. There was a letter that went from Eisenhower to Congress saying, set this thing up. We don't want to be technically surprised. It was on the back end of Sputnik going up and us realizing that other nations were moving ahead of us in the technical race. And so the agency was set up to accomplish that. Very forward thinking, horizon technologies, let's figure it out. Started out doing a lot with space exploration, but that aperture has opened quite a bit. BTO, my office, was actually stood up, the office that I'm in was stood up in 2014 because there was a lot of biology going on in DSO and MTO, and brought all the biologists into one group. And pretty good thinking, I think, because during the pandemic, over the past 2 years, DARPA has actually pushed pretty well in some solutions in that space. And we usually talk about the fact that the ARPANET was a DARPA project that became the internet, night vision goggles, things like that. But the big thing right now is that the messenger RNA technology for vaccines actually came from what was, I think, a DSO effort, but a person, Dan Wattendorf, was in BTO when I arrived at DARPA, actually, and he had funded Moderna back when very few employees and we're developing the concept. So I think you kind of get the idea of the kind of forward thinking that we're looking for, and the kind of things that program managers are going to come in looking at. So if you go to the next slide, this is kind of a way to think about how we fund projects. And the big thing that I encourage everyone to do is take a look at the website. It's updated very regularly. Find the program manager that works in your space and have a conversation with them. If that conversation is through email or if you get a phone call, no matter what kind of way you're interacting, it can be very, very useful because you can get an idea of the kinds of projects that are being, being funded, and that gives you an idea of the kind of thinking that's going on. Program managers are busy, and so oftentimes for me, this starts with an email to me. And for those of you listening in, even if you're not in the biology space, you can contact me, and I'm pretty good at being a point guard and helping to distribute the ball. So so the website's a really good way. Look at what people do, find that person, reach out to them. We have a public inquiry portal that allows you to send a message. And if there's an interest, we'll have a conversation. And DARPA program managers are usually very busy. If there isn't a possibility of moving forward, we'll tell you pretty quick that this probably isn't going to work. Go find money somewhere else. So we don't want to waste your time. We don't want to waste our time. So oftentimes we're very fast with our responses. But the way we fund programs, the big one is number one there, the large programs. And I have 4 of the programs that I've run listed here. And these are usually very large dollar efforts, often in the $30 to $70 million range. We generally fund, anywhere from 2 to 8 entities out of that funding. These are big, move things from one place to the next kind of technologies that often are end-to-end solutions. And so they're, these are the things that we really push towards as program managers. We're probably ranked on how many of these we put together and how well they're run. But I'll, in the subsequent slides, tell you a little bit about 2 of my programs, just to outline sort of what the scale and scope of those are. We also have seedlings, and these are, potential technologies that could be there, or they could be projects that once we get a program and, number one there up and running, we realize we're missing this little piece of technology. And it'd be great if we could fund this to solve this part of the apt technology that I'm developing, for example. So it's really looking if there's a there, and then also trying to assist within our program goals. And what I forgot to mention was programs. Those come out when they come out. We're not like other agencies that put these out on a January, July type schedule, but rather when we get the BAA up and out, it goes out, and then it's not coming back next year. That's the opportunity to work within that program. So you have to watch those very closely. The seedlings have a rolling schedule. And then we also have 2 other alternate ways of funding the SBIR STTR program. Every federal agency has a certain percentage of their budget that goes to these. And program managers often see these as a way to fund more TRL, technical readiness level forward projects, to sort of push those maybe through the valley of death in the technology space. But we can also use those for ideas where maybe the budget demand of that isn't as large as a program, but you want to achieve a certain goal there. And then finally, we do have the Young Faculty Research Initiative, and this is on an annual schedule. This is where we're looking for faculty. I think the rules put this within the first 6 years of your current position. And it's usually wrapped around a topic concept. So program managers are asked to submit topics up through the office, and then those go out in a large format BAA. And one thing that you guys need to keep in mind is that there are a lot of topics embedded because it's from all of the offices at DARPA. So if you just see it and read the first few and think this isn't for me, you could be completely wrong, because when you get to the very bottom of the list, that may be, you know, what you're interested in. An example, I had a topic a few years ago where we were trying to develop the minimal plant cell. So I wanted to strip all the genetic unnecessary pieces of the plant genome away so that we could develop a minimal plant chassis. When that BAA went out and that was all listed, most of the things at the beginning were, you know, information systems oriented. And so looking at, you know, I2O type topics. And I imagine people just looked at that and said, well, there's nothing in here for me. So, you know, the response maybe within that wasn't as good as expected. So I encourage you with those topics to read all the way through and see if something fits. All right, you can go to the next slide. So this is something that comes up often. I imagine Wes probably mentioned the Howell-Meyer Catechism, but this is basically a list of questions that a DARPA program manager in the 70s developed so that we could more quickly evaluate ideas. And when I came into the agency, I thought this was unnecessary. And at this point, I live by it. And when people pitch me ideas, I start out with, okay, very simple terms, no jargon. What are you trying to do? Number two, how is this done today? And what's the current limitation? What's new with your approach and why do you think it'll be successful? What enabling technologies have emerged that tell us it'll work? Who's going to care? Who's going to buy it? And part of that also comes in with DARPA, with the D in DARPA, which is defense. So we also have to consider how is it defense relevant? And you'd be surprised at how wide that net can actually be cast as we think about things like climate change, agricultural security, water security. There are pieces there that have defense relevance that you wouldn't traditionally kind of grab onto. So you'd be surprised at what we're interested in. And then, of course, what are the risks? How much will it cost? How long will it take? Some of those basic ideas. But if you're formulating a concept that you want to talk to a program manager about, put it in this context. Answer these questions, paragraph each, maybe, if you were like trying to wrap your brain around it. And then that way, it's in a format that we can evaluate very quickly. It's not unlike being a professor and having students write essay answers and making sure that they underline the important things that they know they're supposed to tell you. You want to make sure that you really put this information right in front of us so we don't have to go running after it and ask a lot of questions. So this information is on the internet. You can find it just about anywhere. Put in Howell-Meyer, and this will be the first thing to come up. There are some variations. The questions have evolved over the years, but it's all relevant, relatively similar. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just take 7 minutes and then we can jump to some Q&A, and you can click through the build on this slide. I forgot that it's one of those horrible ones. Yeah, just to give you sort of a flavor of what a program looks like, this is the Engineered Living Materials program. This really had the concept where we were thinking, and actually my friend Justin Gallivan was the one that developed this program, and I inherited it when he departed. But the original concept was basically when you look at this desk, it's wood. It was once alive. It's now dead. It can't heal itself. It can't grow in any ways. It's not dynamic. So how do we start to think about materials from a dynamic point of view? And we actually had two different tracks within this program. The first was very fundamental. How do we set up the architectural rules in biology to provide 3D structure development that we want? And so the expression of proteins on the cells of surfaces for attachment in a very defined way. Can we push that capability from that super fundamental rules of genetic life? That's track one. That actually ended 2 years into the program. And it was designed just to say, hey, how far can we push this concept? Because the DARPA idea also is we want to generate excitement and preliminary data in an area so it's able to move forward. On the other side, we had much more tangible projects where we were thinking about the development of some of these materials. And if you go to the next slide, this is sort of the outcome near the end of the program that I think has really been pushed forward. So the concept here was biological cement. So essentially you have bacteria that take in carbon dioxide and calcium, assemble those molecules into calcite, which is exported outside of the cell, crystallizes, and interlocks grains of sand. And so the concept here is to use this type of material as a concrete alternative, which, by the way, is carbon positive, negative, whichever is the right way to say it, but it pulls carbon in, doesn't put it out. So it's a environmental win also. But pushing this kind of technology to where you can meet the demands of traditional cement needs is really what we were pushing towards. And so actually there's a little video there. We'll see if it plays very well on Zoom. But this is treated and untreated surface. You can see on the left, untreated, my boot went in, knocking on it with my hand. You can see that we have a hardened surface. But show this video just because it sort of shows that the technology works. We also do real science, and I could show you graphs and figures that compare our bioconcrete against traditional concrete. Ours also has this cool piece of it where we can set it up and harden surfaces within 48 hours. So compared to 30-day cure times with traditional concrete, I think there's a possibility that this technology will become, a big deal in the future. If you go to the next slide, kind of another cool thing about DARPA programs, we also realized along the way that it could be used as a dust abatement project. So the top line, 3 pictures, is actually a V-22 Osprey landing on a pad in Yuma, Arizona, on our prototype dust down pad, as compared to a control, which is the bottom line of the pictures, where if you can imagine actually being the person in the Osprey, that landing would become a bit harrowing given your lack of visibility. And so we see this alternative way that this material could be used. And this could be, a very broadly used technology when I think about agricultural dust scenarios where we use petroleum-based dust abatement products. This would be something that, could potentially have broader impact. All right, so if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to tell you about 2 other quick programs. This is my resource program. We're trying to turn plastic into food. And this basically has a pretty obvious pathway. We're looking at molecularly deconstructing long chain hydrocarbons. So we're not melting plastic and then reforming it into another format, but rather actually breaking down PET, polyethylene, polypropylene, and breaking those down not all the way to individual carbons, because we want to conserve the energy, but into 8 to 16 carbon chains that could be utilized biologically for upcycling. So using it as a food source. So our concept evolved as we were building the program. Some of the breakdown products have direct uses, but the buildup was really going to 2 concepts. One is macronutrients, because I'm the food and ag guy, so that makes sense. But then when we were talking with the Marines, they said, food's great, but we would love to be able to lubricate vehicles, weapons, things like that. So could you make oils that meet military spec? And so we pushed in that direction as well. But this program is in year 2. We're making quite a bit of progress. It's going really, really well. And I should also kind of stop there and say, we have these programs that are up and running. I have funded teams to work on both of these concepts. So I'm not necessarily looking for more people to work on it unless there is a really good reason. But rather, as I talk about these things, think about the kind of things that I would potentially want to fund, and what, where my brain is going. That's where your funding opportunity comes from. Kind of understanding the general framework of a portfolio and thinking about where the next thing that could fit in is. So the last slide that I'll show is the next one. And this is just an example of an SBIR. Actually, this was an STTR program that I put together. Again, basic logistics argument for defense here. Rubber, natural rubber, 99% of it is produced in Southeast Asia, and somewhere around 99% comes from a single plant species. And so when you think about our ability to acquire rubber for a lot of the products, and the US military is one of the top purchasers of natural rubber in the world, there's a pipeline problem that we need to think about. So we were doing a little bit of homework and realized that there are 3 domestic plant sources of rubber, and it's an industry that needs some further development, both in the plant engineering side, also in the scaling of the agricultural capability. And so there's a lot of need there. And I wanted to really focus on that genetic piece. So we looked at funding projects in all 3 of the plant species to look at the ability to increase rubber production and survivability in agricultural scenarios with those plants. And so we've pushed into that area, thinking about providing this kind of cool alternative. And then that evolved in a bunch of different ways, where dandelion, for example, can be grown in indoor agricultural scenarios. So you may have an opportunity to go a different way agriculturally. We have a pretty well-known pathway with sunflower and how to put that into an agricultural scenario. So there's different aspects there. And then waiuli is a desert shrub, which could be a really good choice in looking at reclaimed land or difficult to do agricultural places. So there's a bunch of opportunity, but it fit really well into this STTR, where we may have people in research labs and universities that want to spin out companies. So the idea with this project was really thinking about, how do I sort of engage a large group of folks into the space, and then start to line up the pieces for this industry to continue to emerge. And so I'm not saying I'm the only one doing this, but I wanted to be a part of this, sort of this idea. And then, yeah, it was really cool this last year. I think this got put into a push in the federal budget. So for once, I was way ahead of the curve. But with that, I just wanted to open it up so that we have time for questions. And I really appreciate being here. And I hope, Sandra, that this was what you were looking for.
What is TRF? Is that to projects to completion or to start a project?
No, so TRL, it's TRL is technical readiness level. So that's where the military sort of puts, and maybe DOD at large, it might be a government thing altogether, but basically looking at the stage of research. So oftentimes DARPA projects are funded within TRL 1 or 2. And there's very specific terms for this, but it's early stage research. But oftentimes we push pretty fast because we properly fund projects and move all the way up to TRL 4 or 5. And then we're starting to look at field testing some of what we're developing. So yeah, the goal is always to, well, it's kind of funny when you start as a program manager, you think of these 20-year horizon technology concepts. You get the money from the director's office as you're setting up the program, and that's not an easy. That's a long road to hoe. And then as soon as you get the program up and running, even though you're at TRL1, your boss is like, okay, so when are we going to get this out to the field? When's it going to be TRL6? And so it's just a way that we think about projects. And the government agencies, if you think about DoD funding ecosystem, we have agencies like DARPA that's very much at that early stage, and we have agencies like DITRA, which is a little bit more probably in that later TRL stage. But then there's also other funding in the middle with AFRL and Army Research Lab and NRO, and a lot of different pieces. So one thing that the government I think we try to do is make sure that those technologies move from stage to stage to be properly funded as we move along. So in the chat, can researchers of materials and mechanical departments able to apply to the rubber or plastic projects you described? So the projects that I described are already funded, and those ships have sailed. But I think DoD writ large has really recognized that this is something that we need to push forward. And so I think there's, in the near future, probably going to be quite a few different programs that are coming up in that space. And I think if I put my Nostradamus kind of thinking on, it's going to be very, very broad. So it could be things like plant-based material development. It could be recycling type concepts of current rubber materials. It could be alternatives that meet the same military specifications. It could be, laboratory microbe-based development. Although, that's been done a few times before, but there's always new avenues for those types of concepts. So yes, you definitely can look into that. And then Sandra asked about proposers days, also very important. When we develop a program and we're getting ready to put the BAA out on the street, let's step back for a second. As we're developing a program concept, it doesn't just come out of thin air. Usually it comes from, something that I've heard, people I've talked to, and I start developing an idea, and I'm working with my team. I have a technical team of 3 scientists in different areas, and we really talk through things, but we also reach out to the community. So if you ever have an opportunity where a program manager says, hey, I've been thinking about this idea, can you talk to me about it? Say yes, because that's something that we're trying to get information. We want to make sure, if you think about, technology as a wave, we want to be on top of it, not under it. So we don't want to give out money and then it just done because somebody's already done it. But we also don't want to be way, way, way too far back in the water. So we put together these concepts, we think about them, we get to a point where we're putting out a broad agency announcement. And when we do that, we also schedule a proposers day. And the idea here is to bring the community to a location. Over the past 2 years, we've done it on Zoom. So it's not quite as effective because you don't get the, around the coffee machine conversation. And it's just not quite as effective like most things, but I think we've made do. But I think we're probably coming back with more traditional proposers days. And the idea is we as program managers want to tell you as the research community exactly what we want to do. So we're not, like I said, it's all very program manager centric and trying to fit into a vision. and we want to make sure that we express that vision to you. The other use of a Proposers Day is to bring that community to one place so that you guys can interact. When I think about my advanced plant technologies program and the Proposers Day that we had for that, it was really, really fantastic. The basic idea of the program is to use plants as sensors in the environment. And so as we're developing, plants as sensors, the people that work in that space don't necessarily know what the military needs are. They don't necessarily know what the sensor platforms are going to be. So they're not, super knowledgeable on what to build. They can guess. But at Proposers Day, we gave an opportunity for those two communities to come together, and teams that were successful were actually born out of that. So for Proposers Day, I would suggest, talk to your administrators or your leadership, look at budgets, but try to show up in person. That way you can interact more effectively. And if you can't do that, there's usually a Zoom link or something like that so that you can get the information. But Proposers Days are incredibly useful for everybody. All right, and looking at the chat. And how do you find out about Proposers Day? We will put those out on the street. A lot of times it's actually in the BAA, or it'll be on the website advertised. We also put those out on social media, so become a friend of DARPA on Facebook and other platforms, I guess. Yeah, so if somebody else is it sounds like a little entomologist as well. So that's great. Yeah, to confirm, yeah, good way to communicate if you're working in my area would be to send me sort of an exploratory email. So something where you say, hey, here's a basic concept. Because as the government, I can't ask you to put together documents and things like that if you're not being compensated. But if you just float an idea, so the initial email could be a very short, hey, here's the general idea. Are you going to be doing anything in this area? And if I'm not, but somebody else is, I would be able to pass that information along. And then probably the most effective way to take me somewhat out of the middle. But like I said, I will try to help distribute the ball if you need. But the most effective way would be to look at the website, look at the program managers working in your area and directly contacting them. Most offices ask that program managers respond to those inquiries within like 72 hours. So if you don't get a response, go ahead and you can resend. So postdocs, we do not have postdocs on site. So we're a funding agency. We do not have research laboratories. We simply put together large programs and fund researchers to do it. We certainly fund a lot of postdocs, if you can imagine, but actually on site we don't. But we do have a new program, or not a new program, but sort of a thing called DARPA Risers. So we're looking at trying to promote the careers of some people in those postdoc roles that have worked on DARPA programs. So we're very supportive of that kind of work structure within laboratories. Yeah, so a question about programs in the combating of spreading of misinformation, disinformation on the internet. Yeah, so we have an office called I2O, Innovation Information Office, I think is what it is. But I2O, and there are several program managers working in that space, and yeah, certainly has been very active within their group over the past few years. So I would look at the website and check out who's working in that space, and they can certainly give you some information. And then Sandy also asked about, are we looking for, projects closer to prototyping stage? And I would say no and yes. I think the DARPA does what DARPA needs to do. So, the real goal would be more, I would think about it as when we start with a concept, we definitely have a goal in mind of handing something to the warfighter at the end of a program. So, oftentimes those technologies need some additional work to get to that point. But the goal from the beginning is to not just do research for research's sake, although we do have some work in different offices, where we're working with fundamental physics or mathematics, where that line directly to the warfighter is a little bit more difficult to draw. But what we, in a large number of programs, are really thinking of, we have this problem and we want to develop a solution. So we're not just looking to investigate, to write papers, but rather, driving towards sort of a stage where we can either hand the technology to the next agency that continues it, or something where if we can, get lucky and get all the way to something that moves directly directly into the customer base, then that's fantastic too. So the Hallmeyer questions, generally, if you're writing a white paper and using that as the framework, a couple of sentences per Hallmeyer question is usually normal. If it's a large problem that's obvious, you don't have to spend a lot of time selling us on the idea that it's a problem. Or if technology, is something that hasn't changed in 100 years, letting us know that is a good thing. But really, when it comes to, I think it's question 3, where it's like, what are you doing and how is it different? That's where the meat of our understanding comes. So really think about, telling us why it needs to be solved, or not why it needs to be solved, but why your solution is the one that you think will be successful. And again, it's okay if the solution is somewhat crazy. And oftentimes when we put programs together, there's a thought where if at least, if at least 10 of your friends don't tell you that it's a crazy idea, then it's probably not for DARPA. So, kind of out of the box thinking. Advancing the horizons of national security, where we're, so I think, Sandy, you're probably asking about the DARPA Forward events. We are going to have, and I'm tangentially involved with it as a program manager, not part of the construction of the events or anything, but we have events where I think we're going to 6 locations or 8 locations, can't remember, across the country, and having sort of large events where we're going to have DARPA researchers, DARPA program managers, DARPA leadership provide talks, also people, higher ups within DOD and maybe even across government, giving talks and telling about some of the maybe the roadmap to where we want to go in the technical advancement space. We encourage everybody. I think it's a good opportunity to get to know DARPA. It's also a good opportunity to find out, how to get further involved. We're also using it as sort of a platform to look for new program managers, so people that do my job. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, we sort of pull from the research community the best, the brightest, people that very much have forward thinking and want to bring in new ideas and new concepts. So DARPA Forward would be a good way to kind of interact with us on that idea. And so those are happening, and they're geographically located. So I think there's one in Atlanta, is probably the closest to Florida. The first one that we're going to have is coming up in July, I think, in Colorado, at Colorado State. So yeah, those would be good events to go to. The BAAs do go out on grants.gov, and anywhere that you can find government solicitations. Also, if you are on social media, they're usually blasted out that way along with the Proposers Day information. So that's a good way to find that. We also put it on our, we also put it on the website, and there are links that direction. The toolbox, I'm not involved in that, so I'm not sure exactly, Sandra, what that is. But yeah, I'm not sure about the toolbox. I think it's something that Wes was doing with contracting, if I remember correctly. And so DARPA, and I'm sure he told you guys all this information, but we're also unlike other agencies because we have in-house contracting. So things at DARPA usually move pretty fast. So of course, on the technology side of things, we're always trying to move quickly and be disruptive within the technology sectors. But also with contracting, once if you're lucky enough to be selected as a DARPA participant, those are it's a fast process. We're usually 90 days to starting work. So contracting moves very fast. Oftentimes, part of the holdup within contracting comes on the researcher side with agencies or universities or companies. But yeah, the thing that you need to think about with DARPA, especially if it's a big amount of money, is that quick start. So you have to be fast, you have to be nimble. In the world I came from, oftentimes, if you did get funded, you started a search for a postdoc who may or may not come for some amount of time. And at DARPA, it's really difficult to move forward in continuing funding if you have to get those pieces in place. So we are human and we understand, but we're also looking to move quickly. So think about ways, if you were funded and if it is a large amount of money with a lot of work, how you can move the pieces you have into place to be able to execute quickly. Yeah, so when you're thinking about tangible products, so if you're actually making something that you wanted to prototype, how much should you promise? Well, that's the beauty of grant writing, right? You definitely have to gauge it appropriately. And so, I think, the most important thing is to think about where the technology is and how some new innovative way to approach it is going to move it more quickly towards completion. And so, I think be very thoughtful about how much you can get done, but also, a lot of times when I was doing research at the university, I was working on a shoestring budget when I had new concepts, or I was trying to get a small amount of money from administrative sources, either the dean's office, chair's office, research office, to be able to push something forward. But you had to be, very thoughtful about that. In the case of a DARPA project, we're going to properly fund you to push this forward. So you want to think about that realistic nature of what you can accomplish. And when you're putting a budget together, don't try to, impress us because it's so low, or express that it's this huge problem and the budget's, hundreds of millions of dollars, but think about what the correct budget is to be able to accomplish it, and then put the goals of a project within that time space. If you're doing a DARPA program, they're usually 4 to 5 years in duration. Seedlings are generally 1 year in duration. So think about what you can get done in that small timestamp. The clearance level of DARPA scientists and program managers, everybody in the building, you have to have a clearance. You don't have to have a clearance coming in. So that is not necessary if you were going to come work at DARPA. But we do have classified projects, and there are classified needs. And so that is how that works. If you're a researcher and it's an unclassified program, you don't have to worry about clearance at all. So that's not an issue that you guys need to think about. Yeah, but if you are going to work in the building, then clearances, yeah, it can't speak for SRO necessarily, but I think it is something that you have to be able to get your interim secret clearance, and then depending on the nature of the projects you work on, it can elevate from there up to TS and potentially so that you can do some SAP work. So yeah, broad range there. Yeah, so I think, we're 3 minutes out. So Sandy, I know we're communicating well here with the chat function. Do you have any other questions? Anything I didn't hit on that you want to hear in the last minute? Yeah, so if you are going to be in the DC area, as an individual, you could reach out to a program manager if you have a good reason to meet. I think that would be appropriate. We've also at different times had university groups that actually come visit. So an example there would be if you had a university administrator like the VP for research that wanted to bring a group of sort of superstar 3 or 4 or 5 faculty to have a conversation, then you can reach out to us, and our public relations people can actually help us coordinate those events. And sometimes if it's in a specific biology area, we could even handle that in-house within BTO. But yeah, there is a pathway to do that. All right, well, hearing none, Sandy, thanks so much for running this. And you guys have my email if you need anything from me. I'll be around. Appreciate it.